All right, so Java 3 Lesson 2, and today we're learning about something called static methods. And so, again, this is a very important lesson in overall Java programming, and this is where you're going to be learning more complex structures, and this is something you'll be using a lot in both Java 3 and Java 4 and any other programming that you're going to use. So this is where we start learning the real programming. Not that the other ones weren't, but it's important. Right, so general format for a static method. I'm going to be explaining more what a static method is in other slides, but general formatting. So you can see here that we have something like public static void print string, parentheses, curly brackets, system.out.println, and then inside we have string A. So the output, if called, which again, I'll be discussing later what called means, would be A. Okay, so one thing you can notice is similar to something that you've already seen is that it's similar to the public static void main string args brackets. And it is very similar. So this public here, so public and static, they're all keywords, and void as well. They're all keywords, like a lot of other things in Java. So these basically all stay the same. Print string here is a name. So like with variables, you have to have a name with a method. So this print string is a name. That means you can name it whatever you want. It doesn't have to be print string. Parentheses, which we'll go over more what goes in between them later. And then curly brackets, which are the general thing. And then inside here is the body of your method, which means you put whatever code in here that you want. So you could put a for loop in there, you could put a while loop, whatever you want, as long as it's syntax oriented and like everything's good and there's no errors, then it would do whatever is here. Right, explanation. It's a lot of words. Sorry about that. But general explanation of it. So just reading it, static methods are outside of the second pair brackets. So outside of the main method, which is the part where you do most of your regular code. But it's inside the first pair brackets, so inside the public class. So static methods are methods that you create, where every time you call them in between the second pair brackets, the main method, the code inside them runs. So you should start getting familiar with how I call them. So when I say the main method, you should know that it's this stuff like in the second pair brackets. And when I'm saying public class, it's all of it. Reason why I'm saying specifying that static methods are methods that you create is because if you remember, so like the math class where you do math.random. Math.random is a method. So those are stuff that Java gives to you that you're not creating. But static methods are methods that you personally create, in this case at least. So, okay, you can have as many static methods as you want. That means that you can create multiple different static methods. So you don't have to do it specifically about printing a string. You can do it about loads of different things. Yes, if you think about it, it's kind of like a function, basically a function. In a way, though, it's kind of not, but you'll see more. And functions in Python, I mean. Anyways, the previous example is a type of method that only runs but doesn't return. And again, I'll be going over what return means in a few more slides. These methods are usually used for doing things, such as printing things or computing things. The purpose of using methods is to be able to store code in a reusable container where you can use the code as much as possible in a limited amount of space. That's mainly because when you don't want to keep copy and pasting code over and over when you only just want it to like do it a few times, But with methods, if you just write one line of code in the main method, it can do it multiple times. Sorry, not one line, but if you write like 3 lines of code, it can do like a 5-line piece of code, like however many times. So it just limits, like makes your code a little bit more neat, consumes less space. Naming conventions for methods are first letter is lowercase and the first letter of every word after that, first word, is capitalized. Again, this is a naming convention, so you don't have to do it, but it's good practice to do so. So, okay. When I say here that the type of method we just went over only runs but doesn't return, that's specified, if we go back to the slide, that's specified by this void here. So if you think about it, the word void, it means nothing, right? Nothing, empty, abandoned. That's kind of what it means here. It means that you're not returning anything, and returning, again, I'll go over later. But this just signifies that you're not giving anything back. You're only doing something like printing, or you're calculating something like adding. Okay, going back, and we already went over the slide. So how to run methods. So I was talking about calling methods. Running methods is the same thing. So the following is an example of how to run a method. And that would be print string, parentheses, semicolon. So this print string here, whatever goes here is whatever the name of the method is. So if you did something like print integer, it'd be print integer here. Parentheses, so all methods, when you call it, they have to have parentheses around it. And then the standard semicolon. So you can see how it's kind of similar to how we did math.random before. So again, this is known as calling the method. Calling, running is basically the same thing. Executing, same thing. Note that this code would go in the main method. So again, you can also use this code as many times in your program as you want, and it will run the code in the method however many times you called it. So you put 3 of this call here in the main method, and it will run the method 3 times. All right, sorry, I got lost in the code. Yeah, so methods can hold any type of code that doesn't generate errors and exceptions, like I said, and it'll still work the same as in a regular program. The only difference is that now it's in a reusable container so that you can use it multiple times now. So the print string, parentheses, is where the name of the method goes, followed by a set of parentheses. Nice. So example of what a program will look like, just to illustrate a little bit more where you're supposed to put it, a method. So you can see here that we have the public class up here. And then the standard public static void main string args. So this is the regular main method. And you can see here that this is the method that I showed you before. And it goes, you can see, not in the main method, like right beside it, but it's also inside the public class. Something like this. And this is how the formatting would work as well. You can see here that I called the print string here, which corresponds with this. And in this case, the output would be A, since we're calling it one time, which means we're running the method one time. And that means that we're printing out 1A. Another type of method, and that is wrong grammar, but framework of methods add parameters. So you can see here that we basically have the same thing as last time, except this time we have things between the parentheses. So these are called parameters, and they're kind of like things you input into the method to make the method work. So in general, you can't have a method. So you can't input stuff into method without parameters. You have to have parameters in order to use something inside the method. So if you notice, like in the first example, when I printed the string A out, every single time I called it, I could only print out A, which of course is not very helpful when you have to do other stuff, right? So when you have parameters, you're making it so that you can input values and then use it inside the method, when otherwise you couldn't do it. So you can see here that I have a string A and a string B. And notice that you have to have data types here. You can't just put an A and a B. So string A, separate comma, string B. And then inside here, you have a system.out.println A plus B. So calling the method in this case, you would do something like print string, in parentheses, a string and a string. So this time, when you're calling the method, you would have to put the parameters inside the parentheses. That's where basically all parameters go. Also, the thing with this is that, for example, if you didn't put this B here, and you just put the A inside the parentheses, then Java would give you an error, because when you're using a method and it has parameters, you have to put exactly that amount of parameters inside the method for it to work. If you don't, then it's going to give you an error. If you have the wrong data type, then it's going to give you an error. So if this B was actually a 5, it asks for a string, and you can't just put an integer there, and that would also give you an error. But yeah, in this case, the output would be AB, since it adds this A and this B together. Explanation. So this is a type of method that accepts parameters. Parameters are data that are needed for a method to work, because the method will use those data pieces inside of it. So parameters have to go between the parentheses of the method name. Notice that when you call these types of methods, you also have to include the parameters needed inside the parentheses. Like the other method, this method only does things like printing and computing numbers. So these methods can have any number of parameters, though they have to be separated by commas, and parameters don't have to be all of the same data type. So you could have a string parameter and an integer parameter. Also, note that you can't enter more or less parameters than defined. That's exactly what it is said. The parameters that you enter don't have to have the same name as the ones defined in the method. The names of the ones in the method is what you will use to write code in the method. So going back here, you can see that this string A and string B, that's what we use to write this computational statement. So it doesn't matter what you enter here. This is the variable name. It's kind of like creating a variable here. You're using those variable names to compute. Okay. Anyways, so yeah, that's all the explanation for that. Gonna move on to the next slide. Another type of method. So this is the last one, mainly. So framework of methods with return types. So I'll get into return types in a second. So you can see here that we have a public static. And then instead of void here, like we saw before, we have an int here. So the data type int. And then we have print int, and then int A, int B with the parameters here. And instead of just like having a print statement here, we have a return here, A plus B. So again, I'll explain everything in a second, so you'll know how to use this in a second. So one way I had to use the method, int a equals print int 5, 9. So again, 5 and 9 are the parameters. The print int is the name. So the reason why we don't store it, the reason why we're storing it in a variable is because we're returning it. So with these types of methods, instead of just printing something out or computing something, in this case, we're actually returning something into the call. So that means that this method here, sorry, give me a second. So in this method here, like it has to give something back. So let me try to describe this in a right way. So like, okay, so in like the void methods, when it's running something, it's just directly outputting. And that doesn't give you a chance to actually use the value in some way. So for example, if you wanted to, I don't know, use this method to do addition and then incorporate it into another program that does more with it, if you just do a void method, it's just gonna, I don't know, print it out, and then you're never gonna be able to use it because you're already printing it out. So when you do like a return type method, then it gives you the value of it, and then lets you decide what to do with it. So that's why when we're calling it, we have to put it in a variable, because otherwise, if we just put print int 5, 9, then it's still gonna run, but like you're not keeping the value, and then that kind of loses the point of the whole method. So note, this is another way to use a method. Note that there is no extra semicolon after the call statement. So if you wanted to print it out in the main method after you get the value back, then you do print statement and then print int 5, 9. And again, just notice that there is no semicolon here, whereas there was a semicolon here. So output, if printed, would be 14, since 5 plus 9 is 14. Explanation. So this type of method returns a value, but it doesn't print anything automatically. You can set the method call to a variable like the example before to save it. So just make sure to set the variable to the correct data type, or you could also just print it out in a print statement. So note how the first part of the method is not the same as before. The void was replaced with a data type name. So this is how you would define a return type. So return types, they represent what data type you're going to give back to the main method. So for example, if you were doing something like this before, where you're turning a plus b, which obviously is going to be an integer since 5 plus 9 equals 14, which is an integer. So you would put an int here. But if you're doing a print string like before, and you had a string a, string b, return a plus b, then you would put public static string here instead of int. So whatever you're returning, you put the data type there. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the void was replaced with a data type name. This is how you would define a return type. These types of methods need a return type, and you would put whatever the supposed output's data type is there. Make sure to put the correct return type, since if you have the wrong one, you could cause an error. You can also accept parameters like with the other type of method, but you don't have to. So you could just have 0 parameters if you wanted to. Parameters and return types can use any data type, even arrays. And just note that an array's data type is the part before the name when you initialize one. So for example, if you're doing an int array, then it'd be the int pair of square brackets. And that would be the data type. You can also, you can only have one return per method, though you can have more if you use if statements. So you're required to have a return which, if you notice, was this one here. This return is what you specify to return. So that's how like it gives back to the main method, right? So you have to have one of these. If you don't have one, you're going to have an error. Methods with the same name. So this is just like clarifying information. So it is possible to have methods with the same name. Like if you were to do this with variables, you would have an error because you can't have variables with the same name. But in this case, it is possible to have methods with the same name, though they have to have different parameter types or different total number of parameters. So you can't have two methods with the same name and parameters in one class. Classes will be explained later in more detail. Different return types don't work either, so it has to be parameters. This is just something to keep in mind if you're going to create multiple methods with the same name. An example. So first one you have here, you see a print string, normal one. So okay, so and then we have another one and we're printing, we have the same name here, so print string, and we still have a string B this time, and we're printing out B. This, take note, this is not allowed because we have the same name here, but we also have the same number of parameters, and we also have the same data type of parameters. So that's why this is not allowed. You're going to get an error. Over here, this is allowed, and you can see that we have the same method here. But this time, instead of having a string A, we have an int B here. So when we're printing it out, everything is allowed because we have different data types here. Static variables. So there are also different types of variables. So static variables are variables that are visible to the whole class and the methods in it. Again, classes we're going to go over later. It means that it can be used anywhere in the class. So for example, an implementation of it, public static int sum equals 5. So you can see here that it has the same public static as the methods we just went over. In this case, though, it's just, you add the data type that the variable is supposed to be. This is the variable name, and equals whatever number here, semicolon. Again, the int can be changed to any other data type, and this variable is placed outside of the second pair of brackets, main method, and inside the first pair of brackets, public class. It is used like a regular variable. The only difference between static variables and regular variables is the fact that there's different scopes, which means that it can be accessed differently, and you'll get what I mean later on in the course. But this is just extra tidbit since we're going over static methods and all. New type of exception. So a legal argument exception is an exception that occurs when a method has been passed with the invalid parameters, such as wrong data types, incorrect amount of parameters, etc. So this is what I was talking about when you would get an error or exception in this case, if you were to do these. So like all other exceptions, you can test this exception and try catch blocks and with throwing it. All right, I think that's it for today. It's a long lesson. There's a lot of different content, and I'm sorry if I didn't explain it correctly or like I was bad at explaining. But yeah, if you have any questions, you can let me know. Otherwise, in a few seconds, we'll be doing class problems. Right, so these are the class problems. It's a hard lesson. Make sure you understand exactly how to do this so that you're not going to fall behind later. because of this. So trust me when I say that this is not the hardest part of the Java level course yet. So just make sure that you got this down really good, because otherwise you're going to fall behind and then you're going to suffer. So regular problems, challenge problems, try to do all of them just so that you're really familiar with it. But yeah, otherwise I think that's about it. Again, I'm not trying to scare you, but this is like, it's a really important step in your progress. So just make sure you understand it, and I think should be fine if you do. Otherwise, that'd be it for today.